All right, so now let's take a look at Dynamic CRM 2011 Entity Creation. This way we'll be able to go through all of the details required to create an entity and be able to weigh the choices that you have to make. So first of all, we'll go through the entity definition properties. This includes the display name and plural name, which are the names used when presenting the entity to users in the UI. They're also used in naming system-created views. The name itself, which is a schema name, cannot be changed after the entity is created. This is also true of some other of the properties as we go through these slides. The schema name is used in code and in the SQL database. The prefix that you see in the box comes from the solution publisher, and the default is new, which is the default prefix for the default solution publisher in any new CRM installation. Ownership of the records, once created, cannot be changed and defines whether the records will be secured by user or team or by organization. Next, define as an activity entity. If this box is checked, this entity will be supported through the regarding link to associate with any entity that has activity support. It will be grouped with other types of activities such as phone calls, emails, faxes, and the like. And selecting this option will disable a number of other options that don't apply for activities. Finally, the description field, which is a text field that you can use for documenting what the purpose of the entity is and any special instructions. The CRM 2011 Entity Display Areas properties are used to determine what areas that display this entity in the menu structure. So the options include checkboxes for Workplace, Sales, Marketing, Service, Settings, and Resource Center. For unmanaged entities, these can be changed after creation, but for the out-of-box entities or the system solution, these are currently locked down in CRM 2011. CRM 2011 Entity Communications Properties. Under the Communications and Collaboration section, you have Notes, which includes attachments, and this allows users to attach notes and documents to a record of this entity. The Activities box enables us to link activities to this entity using the regarding lookup field. Connections. Do we want to enable connections with this entity? Out of the box, CRM supports email sending to users, accounts, contacts, and leads. However, you can make other entities support email by clicking this box. And if there's not an email field anywhere in the entity, one will be added automatically as part of checking the box. Obviously, having an email address field would be critical to being able to send emails. Mail merge. Do we want to enable Word mail merge support and for templates in CRM? Document management. Do we want to support the ability to create SharePoint documentation folders that are linked directly to records of this entity? And queues. Do we want to allow this entity to be sent to queues? I.e., if we create a new lead, do we want to be able to send it to a sales queue? Notice on the asterisk fields that once any of these options are enabled the first time for an entity, they will not be able to be disabled. CRM 2011 Entity Data and Outlook Properties. Under Data Services, do we want to support duplicate detection? This allows us to support duplicate detection and duplicate detection rules. Auditing. Do we want to enable auditing protection for this particular entity so that we can track changes to the record? The next major section is Outlook and Mobile. Mobile Express. Do we want to allow access to this entity using CRM Mobile Express? If yes, we would check the box. Do we want to enable the reading pane in Outlook and support a reading pane when previewing records of this entity while in the Outlook running the Outlook edit? And lastly, do we want to support offline capability for CRM for Outlook? And this supports the ability for users to include selected records of this entity in their offline database using a set of rules. Mind you that security can prevent this from happening, but the point is that this is where you have to enable it. The other thing that we have to be cognizant of in CRM 2011 entities is the primary field properties. The primary field is the field that's used to identify a record and appear as the link to that record in CRM. There's a separate tab called the primary field tab that we go to, and then we can set up in the schema the display name, the schema name, the requirement level, whether it's business required, business recommended, or no constraint, similar to any other attribute that we would create in CRM. The type field is always restricted to single line of text, and the format is always text. The maximum length allows us to set what the maximum number of characters that we want to store in the primary field are. It defaults to 100, except for activities, which default to 200. Now that we know what the pieces are, let's talk about creating new entities in CRM 2011. We go to Settings, Customizations, Customize the System, or Solutions, and select a solution. The default solution is best for site-unique customizations that are not going to be transported, but we may choose to store them in a custom solution when we are planning on exporting a solution. Again, this would be covered in the Solutions segment. So let's go through the process of creating a new entity from scratch. The way that we create a new entity is to go to Settings, Customizations, and Customize the System. This is the fastest way in, and any customizations that we create will not be part of a custom solution. They will be part of the default solution on the system in which they were created. So next we want to go to Entities and click New, click New Entity, and we now have our panel displayed with the options that we were discussing earlier. So this is the entire page that we just went through. So in this particular case, we're going to create a new entity that we're going to call Training Session. We also want to assign it a plural name, so that would be Training Sessions. If you'll notice, when we finished typing the display name, it automatically populated the name field with the new prefix, because this is part of the default solution, and the name Training Session. At this point, we could alter this if we wanted to affect the schema, but after we save this entity, this field will no longer be changeable. The other choice that we have is to determine whether or not we want this to be owned by a user or a team. Since we do want these to be owned by individual users, we will choose the user or team option. Again, this will not be able to be changed. We want this to be a core entity rather than an activity entity, so we'll leave this blank, but we could check this box, which would change what we're trying to do here. Next, what we want to do is determine what areas display this entity, as we discussed earlier, and we want to have this one appear in the workplace, and also I want it to appear under the service column. So I have checked those two. I do not wish for it to be displayed in Settings, Resource Center, or Sales or Marketing, but this will cause this to appear in the menu structure. Next, we want to determine whether or not we want to have notes, which I do because I need to be able to attach documents to the training session. Whether or not I want to have activities, which I also do because any communications that I have with end users I would like to have associated with a training session so I can review any conversations made with anyone about that training session. Under connections, I'm not going to enable that because I don't want to connect to training sessions at this point. I also don't send email to a training session. I might send it to a trainer, but I certainly wouldn't send it to a training session, so I'm going to leave that blank. We're not going to enable mail merge, but I can always enable that later. And document management is not required either. Finally, I don't wish to put this in queues. We will disable duplicate detection. I do want to enable auditing. I have no need for this to be accessed in Mobile Express, so I'll leave that blank. But however, I do want people who are traveling to be able to take their records offline with them, so I will enable that as well. Finally, let's go to the primary field. So the display name of this, I want to change to be Session Name. And as I tab out of it, you'll notice it doesn't change because this was pre-populated. But I could change that to Session Name. No spaces are permitted there. This is a business required field, and I do want to force the name to be there. And normally in most records you will choose that. This is not changeable after you create the record, so you may want to experiment with some entities and try and see how it works when there's no constraint or business recommended on this field. As we discussed earlier, the only type we can choose is a single line of text, and the only format that we can choose is text. But I can alter the maximum length. In this particular case, we know that training sessions have a long name, so I'm going to allow it to grow to as much as 250 characters. I can go ahead and save, but before I do, notice all the information in the navigation pane on the left-hand side is grayed out except for the top one. When I do the save, these will no longer be grayed out, and it will be enabled so I can then go ahead and create any of the items that I want to associate with that entity, including the forms, views, charts, individual field or attributes, and then relationships, which we'll cover in other sessions as well. So now the entity has been created out in the schema, and as you can see, we have a little bit of a different picture. First of all, since this is a custom entity, I can now go change the areas that display this entity. This is not locked down. I can also go back and change the display name or the plural name. I can also choose to enable connections or sending email or mail merge or document management and the like. That's the process of creating a custom entity. Let's take a quick look at adding icons to a CRM 2011 entity. Basically, icons are used to differentiate entities in the user interface. And to implement, we have to have 3 different icons for an entity. The icons required are the icon for the web application, which is 16 by 16 pixels and a maximum of 10K in size, a shortcut icon for CRM for Outlook, which is 32 by 32 pixels, maximum 10K, and finally, the icon used at the top of entity forms, which is 66 by 48 pixels. These must be previously loaded as a web resource, but are a powerful way of making the user interface work more effectively for your users in an intuitive manner. To add icons to CRM 2011, first you open up the form for a particular entity. In this case, you'll notice that we've gone into the default solution, as we've shown before, and come down to the test entity and opened it up. So we're now looking at that, and if we click on the Update Icons button, we're presented with a form that will allow us to upload a different web resource to each of the 3 types of icons to be processed and used within CRM moving forward. So if we go ahead and click on the Browse button for the first icon, this brings up the search, which would search through the web resource looking for images that we would want to pick for this process. Now mind you, you must have previously loaded the web resource, and that's not covered in this particular topic, but nevertheless, it's a straightforward process, and once they've loaded, this is how you attach an icon to an entity.